Keith Wallahan is the Liberal MP for the seat of Menzies. I think if he stands in his seat in a tall building in Doncaster, he looks out and he sees a sea of Labor seats. Keith Wallahan, good morning.
Good morning, Raf. Can I say that when I look out, I see the city that I love?
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. But you also see a lot of Labor electorates and not any Liberal ones.
I do. That's true too.
Should Josh Frydenberg be thought about as the candidate for Kooyong?
Look, I understand why people are, floating these balloons or flying a kite, if I'm to mix my metaphors, but everyone's getting ahead of themselves. These are draft boundaries. We have endorsed candidates who are out there working really hard. And for this to occur, you've got to line up a lot of things, including the administrative committee, which is 19 people who are volunteers and give up a lot of their time to run our division. This is a decision for them, and they would have to actually disendorse someone. And I don't see that happening. I just don't see it happening.
Why not?
Well, because we are a party that's governed by two principles. One is democracy. And to use Amelia Hamer as an example, she was a candidate through a really grueling process where she put her hand up to earn the trust of the Kooyong electorate, which is one of our largest conferences. And they met and they considered a wide variety of talented candidates and they chose her, and she's out working hard. The second principle is we have our own rule of law within the party. We are governed by a constitution that does have provisions for this scenario, and it does give discretion to the administrative committee, but they would need to jump through a few hoops. And one of those is to assess whether something is substantially changed. And there are real issues when you actually go through the seats and the percentages that they've changed by.
So you think it'd be a mistake?
Well, I'm not saying that. One of the things I learned, Raf, I'm here because I challenged a sitting member. And I remember at the time when, from the Prime Minister down, they gave endorsements for my opponent, and the delegates to that conference ignored that. They made up their own mind. So my opinion doesn't matter, and it shouldn't influence their decision, especially for those who are out of state. I love my colleagues, but we really do protect our own parochial view of the party, and the Victorian division is its own entity with its own sovereign constitution. But Raf, can I just say 2 points? There's a lot of cynicism in politics. There's a lot of, when you look internationally, cynicism in institutions of democracy. There is something to acknowledge in the last few days. One is that there is disappointment for those, our candidate Katie Allen and Higgins, and Michelle Anandaraja as the member for Higgins. And that's understandable disappointment because they are two very talented, hard-working, professional women who gave up a lot to be here and are in it for the right reasons. And I spoke to both in the last few days. And of course they're really hurting, but they're both still out there. For Katie seeking to earn the trust of the people until this is finalised, and for Michelle representing her electorate. And I think that says a lot about what's on offer in Melbourne for our democracy. The other is to celebrate the independence of the decision. Yes. The Australian Electoral Commission, we should cherish its independence, because if we were in the United States, the bodies that decide this are a lot more politicised. And so there is allegations of gerrymandering. We don't have that here. And again, that is to be celebrated as well.
Oh, hallelujah. 100%. I think people undervalue the fact, or maybe unaware of the fact, that the Liberal and Labor parties are not fighting about the boundary change, and that's an amazing thing. Keith Wallahan, is it something you mentioned about the boundary changes, as you point out, drawn up by independent public servants? Does the change to the seat of Kooyong favour the Liberal Party or favour the Independent? What do you think?
Look, I am someone who's in the theatre of politics, but I'm also an observer, and I have read the varying comments. There are some that are saying one way, some saying the other. But in the end, every election is different, and people will walk into that booth.
Go on, have a stab. You can make an educated guess.
It's not clear. That's my conclusion from the commentary. It's not clear. We saw the huge changes that happened in metropolitan Melbourne at the last election. That means that votes are up for grab, as it should be, because people like me and my party and the Labor Party and the Independents, we all have to earn the trust every election and start afresh. And I think the people of Melbourne, they want us all to try harder. They want us all to put their interests before ourselves. And that was a huge lesson from the last election.
Is the party putting itself ahead of the voters with this conversation?
It should be the driving consideration is what is best for the people of Kooyong, what is best for the people of Melbourne, and that should be what is the guiding decision. And can I say this? Amelia Hamer is out there campaigning every day, a young professional woman who is working really, really hard. And all of that is, none of that is a criticism of Josh, who's a wonderful person who has contributed enormously and is an enormous talent. But Amelia is the endorsed candidate.
I'll just put this text to you. Julie said this: just the talk about Josh has ruined Amelia's chances. Is Julie right?
Not at all. I think one of the things in politics when you're a new candidate is getting your name out there. So I think Amelia would be quite happy to see her name in all of the papers, reminding everyone of what a talented, hardworking person she is. So I don't agree with that at all.
And your seat's been redrawn. I think you get little bits of even Warrandyte and Wonga Park and other little slices of Box Hill and Blackburn, if I'm looking at the map correctly. Is it better or worse for you?
So for those who use the boots from the last election, it has it slightly harder for me. There's about a 25% change in the population, but I've never taken that for granted. And again, my seat is in metropolitan Melbourne, so it stretches from Warrandyte on this draft boundary through to Box Hill, and some of Kooyong would potentially come into it. I'm a Melburnian, and I see there's a commonality between several suburbs of Melbourne, and I'm looking forward to earning the trust of the people in the old boundary, but also those who will be in the new boundary, whatever those final boundaries are.
But on the last election that got you into Parliament for the first time, on those numbers, this makes it slightly tougher for you?
Slightly tougher. It has it dropping by a point, but again, it's all artificial.
Sure.
It's taking the booths from a point in time in 2022 and projecting it forward. What we do know is there's a huge churn in electorates from new citizens, people who move, people who die, people who become 18 and 21, and I sign all those birthday cards. So there's enormous churn in an electorate. So this stuff is only just a very rough guide. And I hope when the time comes, I wake up every day and go to sleep every night thinking about did I do my best for the people of my electorate today? And I think if we do that and put them first, then I think you should be, or you should at least be open to be rewarded. But again, it's their decision, and I fully respect what they will decide at the next election.
We've been speaking about a state issue, but it's the potential privatisation of the shopfront of births, deaths and marriages. Vic Roads is now run by a couple of super funds, at least the sort of the licence and custom plates part of Vic Roads when I ring them or contact them online. So that's the context for this question. Privatisation of government services over the last few decades, generally good or generally bad?
I sit on the House Economics Committee up here, and I think when you reflect upon whether privatisations are good or bad, it matters whether it's a monopoly or an oligopoly. I think generally privatisation of assets that have been a monopoly or an oligopoly have seen a increase in profits at the expense of the consumer. Where there's proper competition, I think we have seen a benefit. The problem we have here in Victoria, like we did in the early 90s, is that we have an extraordinary debt to deal with. It's higher than the combined debt of Queensland, New South Wales and Tasmania. So we're in a very similar position that we were in the 1990s, where it's break glass in case of emergency. And that is not a good place to be for our state. And so I can understand why they're looking at things like this. But it really means a lot more work needs to be done to make the economy of Victoria viable again.
Does sound like, though, when you say for monopolies or oligopolies, it's a bad idea. There's only one births, deaths and marriages. It is a monopoly. Bad idea to privatise front of house?
It's a generality. I mean, if there's inefficiencies in it that can be better done outside, we should look at it. But these things then become a way of having revenue come in, but have a potential lagging tax through higher consumer expenses down the track.
So opinion on births, deaths and marriages, yes or no to privatising?
I think they should look at it because of the state of the books, but I think we should also properly look at the terms of the sale so that there's potentially certain protections for not having inflated oligopoly or monopoly profits down the track.
And just so I hear, or make sure I heard you correctly, the electricity privatisation in this state, there's kind of a pseudo competition, but there's only, the electrons only get made in one spot. Did that work well or not, electricity privatisation?
I think I can understand why it was necessary. Victoria was, on its knees economically in the 1990s. That was why it was done. So we had to do it to bring our credit rating back up. But I do think on reflection, it didn't lead to the lower consumer prices that were promised at the time. And I think there was some price gouging over the decades.
Thanks so much for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Raf.